do my intro. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Coffee Corner. Today we have a special guest. Okay, let's introduce Mr. Brian Courtney. Hello, Brian.
Hello.
So the reason we feel awkward is we do have a relationship.
It's true. We've been married for a few years now.
So that's why I feel really awkward to do this as a professional podcast. So today we're going to talk about TESOL related topics. So how did you start your TESOL career?
My former school, I worked just as an ESL teacher and then just kind of got different experience. And then after a while, started helping out with the TESOL class and then eventually took over as TESOL trainer. But that whole process took me about 10 years at the company.
So if you need to pick, do you like to teach ESL or you like to teach TESOL?
I like both, but for different reasons. But I definitely like TESOL. I'm involved with TESOL London and in the past with TESOL Canada, and I kind of like being involved with that teacher education and helping teachers get to where they need to be. And that way, I feel like with ESL students, I have a greater impact on them because I'm actually training the teachers that are going to teach them.
So I do have this question from a native speaker perspective. Do you think, if some people might think, well, if you know how to speak English, you might as well just teach English because that's your first language. And then some people might think it is not necessary to get a TESOL certificate. What do you think about that?
No, I think you definitely need to be TESOL certified. In Canada, if you want to teach at the good schools with the good jobs, you have to be TESOL accredited. It's not to not get that. But when I started my teaching career, I taught in South Korea, and there were a lot of native speakers there who are they're teaching because they are young, they're good looking, and they speak English as their native language. And there were a lot of terrible teachers. So modern way of thinking, especially here in Canada, is it doesn't matter if you're a native speaker or not. You just have to be good. But being TESOL certified is kind of the first step in that process.
Okay, speaking of that, so in my last episode, I was talking about accent, right? And then what do you think about accent? Like, have you ever had a student who have really good accent, who speaks really well, but just doesn't make any sense when it comes to teaching?
Yeah, I mean, again, with the native, non-native sort of thing, really accent doesn't mean you're good or not as a teacher. And the more modern way of looking at things now is, it used to be all about accent reduction. So you want to sound like a native speaker. But in a country like Canada, I want to sound like a Canadian. And then I would always ask a student, what is a Canadian? And it's kind of hard to pinpoint. We have so many people, even in a city like here in London, Ontario, 20% of the people were not born in Canada. So you hear accents every day. So I don't care if you're an ESL student, a newcomer to Canada, or even a TESOL instructor or like an ESL teacher. It's not about accent. It's about understandability. And as long as everyone can understand you, then it's the other skills that are more important.
So do you think, well, if you're not teaching English and then maybe accent is not a required skill or required aspect to have, but when it comes to teaching English, people think if I'm going to learn from you, I want to learn the best, right? But when I go to find a job or going to go for a job interview, would my accent affect whether they're going to hire me or not?
Yeah, again, in Canada, I think that's less and less important. I mentioned the stat about TESOL or about London, Ontario. In Toronto, I mean, it's even more diverse. 50% of the people in Toronto were not born in Canada. So, everyone you meet has an accent. Nobody really cares anymore. It's about understandability and are you good, right? And so it doesn't matter if you're a teacher, a banker, a doctor. If people can understand you, that's fine. The real issue is, are you good at what you do?
So what if, as a teacher, what if I sometimes make grammar mistakes while talking or teaching? Do you think that's a major thing to think about?
Well, I mean, I think I'm a TESOL instructor. I've been an ESL teacher for almost 20 years, and I'm a native English speaker, and I make mistakes. Everybody make mistakes. You don't want to make mistakes often, and you want to be able to guide your students, and that's why there are minimum language proficiency requirements for ESL teachers, because you want to be a little bit ahead of where your students are, for sure, but nobody's perfect.
Okay, so I do have a few questions for you. That's from our audience. Okay, so first question is, what is the language proficiency to study TESOL and what for an ESL teacher?
In Canada, there are two teacher accreditation bodies, TESOL Canada, and here in the province of Ontario, TESOL Ontario is probably even more important. Both of them require an IELTS 7 in each skill. They also look at TOEFL and other things, but in general, it's an IELTS 7.
So if I have IELTS 7 or above, does that mean I'm going to be, like, it's good enough to become a teacher?
Well, the word they use is this is the minimum requirement. So you want to be as good as you can be. In TESOL London, we have about 300 member teachers. Half of those are, just under half of those are non-native speaking teachers. I don't think there are more than 10 that have an IELTS 7. My guess would be they're all 8s, 8.5s or more. 7 is good to get started, but you want to be as good as you can.
Okay, perfect. So my next question is, after TESOL training, is becoming an ESL teacher the only career path? And what can I do with the TESOL certificate?
Yeah, so again, in Canada, we have kind of two different levels. There's the certificate level, which is a 100-hour course, and then the diploma level, which is a 250-hour course. Both of those have teaching practicum components as well. With the certificate, in Canada, you can teach at private schools. These are Languages Canada recognized schools, and you can definitely teach overseas. A lot of people who want to go to Korea and start their career, or study or teach in China, teach in Saudi Arabia, wherever, they need the TESOL certificate. The jobs that are more permanent in Canada are working for the school boards, the colleges and universities, and these require the diploma. They require a little bit more. So most people start teaching, but there are other jobs. So you could become an education agent. You can, become a textbook author. There's a lot of like events coordinators for international students. The universities and colleges now have so many international students. They need people who kind of have that background to help on the administrative side. Test proctors. There's a lot of different things. The thing to remember is a lot of those jobs go to people who have experience. If it's, you graduate from university, you get your TESOL diploma, not many people are going to hire you to be a textbook author. Right? They want people who are a little bit more experienced. So most people, get some experience teaching and then kind of branch off into their, area of specialty.
Speaking of experience, I know for newbies, they always think, well, you want to hire teachers with experience, but I don't have experience. If I don't get a job, I'm not going to get experience. How are you going to hire me? So for those people, what is your advice for them to get experience?
Yeah, I think in Canada, you just have to understand that you can't say, well, I have a degree and I have a TESOL diploma, so everybody wants to hire me. So does everybody else. There are thousands of English teachers here who are, non-native speakers and native speakers. For me, I got hired as a supply teacher at the private school I was working at before. And I just kept going in. I would volunteer for trips when students went on trips. I'd volunteer to be the teacher that went with them. And I just volunteered with TESOL London, got involved with TESOL Canada, just kind of always, and it takes a while. And eventually you will get those good full-time jobs, but people aren't typically walking into those right away. So it's about being available, getting out there, getting to know people. It's a relatively small community in Canada, so a lot of teachers in a city like London, we all kind of know each other. So if you make yourself available, you get out, you volunteer with local organizations, you start to make connections, and you'll get a job. But it's not always a quick process.
I agree with that. So I have this kind of a related, but not really directly related questions that I think people always ask, I'm going to fish some compliments here, is when people say, well, babe, your English is really good because you're a husband, or maybe your husband helped you with your jobs or something. What do you want to say about that?
It just doesn't work like that. People like me, but typically in Canada, if you're not good, you're not going to get those full-time jobs. So I know people always ask you or ask me like, well, what did Bay do to get her English up? And I'm like, well, she studied English in China for decades, moved to Canada, did TESOL certificate, TESOL diploma, did some college, did her master's degree, read a million books, and function in English. Talk, 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 talk. And yeah, she's married to me, but I don't teach her English. But there's times where we've been in bed at night and I'm trying to sleep and she's over there practicing her English with her phone. It's not to get that high English skills, those high level English skills. It's not, I've got my IELTS 7, now I'm done. It's always, there's always something more to learn. And you're a good example of that.
So if you're a guy out there and you want to say something nice about your wife, that's a perfect answer to do. Okay, you always say something nice. I have another question. It's about what strategies do you use to address the individual learning needs of students with a different proficiency level and learning styles?
Yeah. I'm lucky now. I work at a public school here in London, at the public school board, and we do have some different proficiencies in each level, but in general, they're put in levels that are appropriate for them. So it's not, the split in the class is not too bad. And you can read textbooks that'll tell you match the strong student with the weak student, so they can work together. But if you're working for legitimate real schools, that honestly shouldn't happen that often.
Okay, so next one, very interesting. How do you foster language fluency and communication skills in your TESOL trainees? And what tips can you share for effective language practice?
So this answer, when you kind of let me preview the question, I thought about this one, and this answer might hurt some people. How do I foster? Can you read that again for me?
Okay. How do you foster language fluency and communication skills in your TESOL trainees?
In my TESOL trainees, I don't. When you're a TESOL trainee, that means you have a university degree. You're looking to become an English teacher. You need to have English skills. At that point, you are not my ESL student. You are taking a postgraduate certificate or a postgraduate diploma with me. You need to have those English skills.
Ouch.
Yeah, I mean, in the reality is, I taught English in Korea, and I had a co-teacher with me. She was the homeroom teacher, taught grammar and listening. I taught speaking, reading, and writing. And she could barely understand me, right? Her English, I sat in and watched one of her grammar classes on my very first day ever teaching English, and there was no English. It was grammar, 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 but all in Korean. And I know that happens around the world. I think most of your listeners are probably in China, and I've taught a bit in China as well, and I know that's true. But here in Canada, every single teacher, there are 300 in London, 10,000 across Canada, they speak English. I mean, I don't have time to make sure you speak English. By the time you get to a college or university level program here, that's up to you. You need to speak English.
I think, yeah, that reminds me of something like when they go to colleges, universities, or even doing professional courses like that, they're hoping to improve their English. But at that moment, at that point, improving English is not their goal anymore, right? So it's all about, this is professional knowledge. You're learning skill to do your career in the future. You're not learning language. So if you really should do a language course, and that might be something you're thinking about.
Yeah, and you see this a lot with like university pathway students where they're trying to rush through the English to get to college or university. And then what they don't realize is it's cheaper and more beneficial to spend a lot more time learning English first, because by the time you get to university, they're not teaching you English. They're teaching you economics or chemistry or whatever it is. And they don't have time to make sure you understand the grammar. That should be done.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it's the same with a TESOL certificate. That's a postgraduate certificate or a postgraduate diploma. By then, you need to be at that level.
Yeah. I remembered when I did my ESL at the language school, I actually felt really bad about myself because I felt like I was such a loser. I had to do an ESL course. But then afterwards, when I went to college and realized how important that was because I learned how to do an essay in like a Canadian university level and then learn the culture, learned like a education system here.
Yeah.
But I was still very overwhelmed the first month at the college.
Yeah. Canada's a relatively unique country. I mean, United States, Australia, and quite a few others. But I mean, we have so many newcomers here, so many immigrants that, you know, you don't get special treatment because English isn't your first language. You're in the same boat as thousands of other people at the university. And if you say, I can't manage this program because my English isn't good enough, there's 50 people waiting in line that have taken the time to do that. So it's better to go slow, make sure you're at the right language level, and then, but I can't be a lifeguard if I don't know how to swim, right? So you want to make sure your language skills are up there.
Speaking of that, probably has nothing to do with that, but we always do that. I mean, like we always do speak of that, but it has nothing to do with that. So when it comes to hiring people, right? And then the common thing, or let's say the common question or a common statement that I've seen so far is they say, well, I'm competing with the native speakers. And then they of course want to hire native speakers because I'm non-native, right? So is that true or?
Not at all. It all comes down to, are you good? And, you know, some of the best teachers I've seen in London, including you, are non-native speakers. This day, especially at government-funded programs in Canada, like the school boards, the colleges and universities, they talk about diversity and inclusion. They want people from diverse backgrounds. They want people who speak other languages because you might be able to help with other students. It brings different perspectives. You have to meet those requirements that, you know, IELTS 7 is a minimum. You have to have a university degree. You have to have your TESOL training. But after that, where you're from does not matter anymore once you meet those requirements. But if you walk into the interview with poor English level and you stumble through the interview and your grammar is bad, then you don't get the job. Yeah, you see people trying to say, yeah, they didn't give me the job because I'm Korean or because I'm Japanese. And it's like, it's not because of where you're from. It's because you're not good. We have many Chinese teachers at the school board. We have many Arabic-speaking teachers at the school board. The thing that they all have in common is they're good teachers and they speak English very well.
But then it comes down to a new term I just learned. It's called unfair advantage. For people like me, right? So we have to work really hard to get to the level that we can speak English fluently and then communicate and do that as our like career. But then for people like you don't really have to try hard. If I assume, right, you don't have to try very hard because you already have the language. All you need to focus is on other things.
Yeah, and that's true. And you know, I talk about this with some of my higher level students, my academic students. You know, we don't learn English because English is the best language or the easiest language. We learn English because the way the past worked out, right now, English is an important language to learn. So yeah, I was born in Canada to a native English-speaking family, and yeah, I kind of lucked out. That's not enough to be a good teacher, but you're right. I didn't have to go through it and learn that language. So it's true.
Yeah. And another situation is you've seen that when you went to China for your job business trip, and they have, of course, they prefer native speakers. And they want those people. And even though, so let's say if we all go back to China and we're all going to go teach English, I'm sure they want you.
No, this is 100% true.
Yeah, right? Yeah. And if they hire us, they might pay you more.
Yeah.
Right? And then do I feel fair? Probably not. But then I wonder, you know, like, what do I lack when it comes to teaching English? I'm sure I can teach as well as you do.
Sure. But if you want to be treated fairly for your skills and paid equally, you need to teach in Canada. But yeah, like when I taught in Korea, I made a lot more money than the Korean teachers there. And I had no experience when I first went over. So definitely unfair. You're a native Chinese speaker. One of our other friends who's a non-native speaker speaks Spanish as his first language. and I speak English as a first language. The three of us we're all excellent teachers, but I know I could get a job in China tomorrow. If I posted my resume online, I would get 1,000 views within the next 12 hours. Yeah, that's it's not fair, and I agree. It's not fair.
Yeah. Okay, that was quite a talk. So let's get to another very interesting question, and I really want to know the answer since I've been using AI ChatGPT recently. So it's what are your thoughts on the future of TESOL training and the evolving role of technology in language education?
Yeah, obviously with technology and ChatGPT and AI, that's all going to be integrated into that. I think the fundamental skills they teach in most TESOL programs, they're not going to change too much. You need those fundamental skills. Things like AI, they're a tool. We've had other things like Grammarly, and now we had spell check. I remember that doesn't seem like a big thing now, but when it came out, teachers were mad because they thought students aren't going to learn how to spell because they have a spell checker, and it's using the tool. But I think teachers are going to have to work very hard to understand how to use ChatGPT and AI tools effectively in the classroom, but also how to explain to their students how to use it. Because the tendency, and I've already seen it, it's kind of been around for about a year here, and I've run into it this summer. Students are using it, and it is a tool that can help, but they're not using it as a tool, they're using it as an easy way out, right? And I can give you an example. Like, if I tell my students to write me an essay, you can go into ChatGPT and say, hey, write an essay about this topic, and it'll spit it out, and you submit it, and then I say, oh, no, this is AI, you get a 0, right? They have AI detectors. So, but that didn't help you learn English at all. That just tried to help you cut time, right? And in the end, that doesn't help you at all. But let's say you were practicing your speaking about returning an item to a store. You can actually ask ChatGPT to come up with a scenario, and they can act as the computer program can act as the store clerk, and then you are the customer, and you can have these dialogues and practice your speaking at home without another person there. So that actually helps. You can ask ChatGPT to create a reading for you and then create 8 questions. And then you answer the 8 questions, and then you can have ChatGPT mark those questions for you, right? So you can use it to practice and improve your English. It's amazing. But a lot of students are going to use it as a way to take the easy route, and that doesn't help them, and it makes teaching a little more difficult because we have to be aware of that and try to catch the cheaters.
Yeah. So speaking of that, you've mentioned how students can use ChatGPT even as a teacher, how you can use that to create your own lesson plan, things like that. So let's say if I'm kind of at a higher level of English proficiency and I can do most of the work, but do I really need to go to school to learn English? Because I can use ChatGPT help with my expression, grammar, other things, right?
Yeah.
So why do I need you?
Yeah, nothing beats talking to people in real life. And that's one of the benefits of going to Canada, the United States, the UK, or whatever to study is, you can practice with your classmates in China. But when you leave the classroom, you all speak Mandarin again and wait till the next English class before you speak English. When you come to Canada, you're forced to use your English. And this is kind of the same with ChatGPT. You can use it, but it's never going to be the same as getting out there and actually talking to people. Because there's a lot more to communication than just reading a screen or listening to the program speak. Body language, context, there's a lot of cultural aspects, idioms, and things that it might not quite.
Mm-hmm. Do you think ChatGPT or AI will make people lazy? In the past, you remember phone numbers, you remember your passwords or account numbers, and now because you have an autofill password thing, and they remember everything, and then you kind of just you get lazy too.
Yeah, I mean, yes or no. I think there'll be students who use it the wrong way, or people in general who use it the wrong way, and to be lazy. But then I think there'll be other people who use it so that they don't need to focus on the small things. They can focus on the new, the bigger ideas. And then that way they're using it to free up time for other things to do. But from what I've seen so far, though, is the people who are the first ones to use it, are the ones who should not be using it. Yeah.
Okay. So back to where I was thinking, where maybe, ChatGPT or AI can replace teachers or something.
Yeah.
So I work at a university writing center,
Yeah.
right? I used to help students with brainstorm and get ideas, work on logic and expressions, things like that. But I've been working on my project. I used to use you as a as a dictionary at
Yeah.
Google. Say, what does that mean if I want to say this? But now I get rid of him, so I start to use ChatGPT to say, oh, this is what I want to say. And does that mean, writing center is not necessary anymore, or we're not going to have more students?
No, see, yes and no. I think, again, for you, you're a very high level English speaker and you're very academic. You finished your master's here, you're working on an academic article, you're doing different things. You're using ChatGPT to fine tune what you're trying to say. That's what it's for, because you know what you're trying to say. You're trying to just polish that. There's going to be a lot of people who don't know what they're talking about. A lot of people who they have no focus, no target, and they're just asking it, what should I do? And that's where using it as a teacher replacement, I don't think it'll ever work, because that computer can't know the students as well as I know my students, right? So for me, in my class, I know my students, but I know their personalities, I know their English levels, but a lot of them I know their family situations, their how they came to Canada, their political situations in their home countries, and we can kind of incorporate all of that into class. Chat GPT can't do that. So right now, I'm not worried at all about it replacing teachers.
Oh, wow, that is a very interesting topic. We might have to do another episode on just ChatGPT.
Yeah.
About how that.
Yeah.
Okay, so next one is, can you share any successful stories of students you've taught highlighting their language learning achievements or something like that?
Well, I mean, I've had in my career, I mean, I've taught thousands of students. And so, I've had students here that have come to Canada as just immigrants on their own. They've gone from kind of that middle level to an academic level and then go off to university. That was pretty common. In particular, we had one student that you'll remember from Saudi Arabia. And he came in for 2 years. He kind of floundered. He didn't do anything in school. The Saudi government pays for students to come, much more so in the past than now. And he was having a good time in Canada and was not a good student. But then he decided, I really want to go off to university. I'm going to study. And he went from like a high beginner to university ready in about a year and a half. That's pretty intense, though. I mean, he's doing 40 hours a week of ESL and homework. But in a year and a half, he went from speaking a little bit of English to writing academic essays and ready for university. And then it's nice to see all those years later, you check Instagram and there's him graduating from university. And I think he went off and did a postgraduate diploma in Australia. I mean, so lots of that. But now that I'm at the public school, it's a lot more of refugees and newcomers to Canada that have more difficult past in their home countries. And so now you see students who've fled their home country with nothing and they come to Canada and they learn English and they get jobs and their kids get to school, and it makes you feel pretty good. But they're all highly motivated. They want to succeed. They don't really have a choice, right? So they need to do it, and they do. They put in a lot of time and a lot of effort, and they succeed.
Do you have a successful story of a TESOL trainee that is not a native speaker?
That is, yeah, sure, of course.
Like, I mean, how so? How did she or he make to where?
Well, I think exactly what we talked about. They have their English level up as good as they can go, and then so I moved from the private school over to the public school board, and now I think at least 5 or 6 of my colleagues are former TESOL students of mine, and all 5 of them non-native speakers, but a lot of them are not, and they go off to do that. I have a couple that are teaching at the college now. Yeah, I mean, it's quite, and then overseas, I've had some students who've done TESOL training with us here in Canada, and then go back. And one woman in Korea now is the vice principal of her school. There are lots of success stories. But at the same time, there are a lot of students who are not successful. I think it's the same as native speakers in that a lot of people think once I speak English, it's easy to be a teacher. And so there are a lot of people who come to Canada and say, well, wherever I'm from, in China, in Korea, wherever, they say, well, I speak English, or I'm an English teacher in China. When I move to Canada, I already speak English. It's going to be easy. I'll be an English teacher. It's easy. And it's not. It's not easy. It's a
job.
It's a job,
Right,
and you have to be good at what you're doing, and a lot of them will not succeed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So speaking of that, I like to use this. What are the important factors that make a good English language teacher?
So obviously, grammar knowledge
Mhm.
and those skills
Mhm.
need to be good. You need to
Mhm.
understand. But I think one of the reasons why I'm successful is my very first teaching in Korea was with kids, just at a hagwon, right, at a after school academy teaching kids. And if you're not entertaining, they don't care at all, right? They're so busy and so tired that they need to be entertained. So I kind of think if it's a 3-point thing. You need to have the language skills, the grammar knowledge, and all of that. You need to be a little bit entertaining, right? You need to keep their focus and be able to get them to work when they don't really want to work. And then the third one is I think you have to have empathy. You have to understand your students are going through different things, understand their life. And especially now when, I'm at the public school and a lot of the students have very traumatic things happen to them in the last while, and that's why they're in Canada. But this is one area where I think non-native English speaking teachers have an advantage because you've learned the language, you've gone through that, what was difficult for you. So maybe it's easier to have that empathy for your students. But yeah, for me, so language skills, you need to be entertaining and you need to have empathy for your students.
Yeah, I was gonna say the last thing that as a non-native speaker that we have the advantage that native speakers. Well, if you speak multiple languages, you might have that empathy. But like going through the difficulties of learning another language, we know that we understand.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a native speaking teacher while I was in Korea. I'm talking to his class about articles. When articles, they don't sound difficult, right? You have the zero article, and the, right? There's 4 of them. And he was getting mad. How can you not understand articles? This is what he's talking to his class. How can you not understand articles? There's only 4. You guys are being ridiculous. You should understand this. And he has no idea that learning articles in English is incredibly difficult. They're very difficult. They're one of the last things that anybody who's learning English will perfect is articles. So, but he doesn't have that knowledge because he's never bothered to learn another language.
So let's say I'm in your first TESOL class, right? Okay. And what is the first thing you're going to tell me?
The best advice I ever got, honestly, on my first day of teaching in Korea, my boss, John, at the time, said to me, and I've said it to every single TESOL class I've ever had since then, is don't expect more from your students than you are willing to put in. So if you're not working hard to prepare, you're not working hard to present a nice class, you're not working hard to, give the students what they need, then don't expect more from them, because if you're not working hard, they're not going to work hard.
I do like that.
Yeah.
But sometimes, how I really got upset about my previous job, right? Because I put so much effort. I was the one who was willing to put a lot, but my students weren't.
No, and that's it. Sometimes you get a group of students that they're not motivated for whatever reason. They don't want to be there. Their parents are making them be there, whatever it is. But as a teacher, you always have to be putting in that effort because the students who do appreciate it, they will respond, right? So you have to.
You have to. Remember, you taught me a word, I forgot, it was like a symmetry or something, like you always focus on the negative part, even though you have 90% of positive stuff, but you have, like, as long as you hear the
cynical,
cynical, yeah. As long as you hear just one negative thing, and then your focus will be fully on the negative thing. But that comes to, that was me when I was at that job, right? So I was like, oh, I had a great day until the last minute, and that student ruined everything. Yeah,
there's always going to be a few. I mean, right now at the public school, we have like 20 students in the class, and there's 18 that are great and 2 that we don't really enjoy. And you can't teach those 2. You have to teach the other 18.
Now I have another question. This is very specific. It's how can I teach grammar in English clearly?
That's a difficult question. How do you teach English grammar? Well, let me sum it up in 30 seconds. No, the thing with grammar is, and this is maybe different than how things are normally done, maybe in the past, but especially in other countries. I've been in China, watched students as they're preparing for the Gaokao and things like that, and there's a lot of teaching to the test. But the reality is, to learn grammar, you need to learn it in a context, right? And that's where in our TESOL class, we always say, yes, you should have a language target for every lesson, and that can be grammar, but it can be vocabulary, it could be pronunciation. But you need to have a topic. What is the theme of the unit? Is the theme shopping at the mall, or is going to the movies? What is the theme? And then you need to combine that with a skill: reading, writing, listening, and speaking. So you cannot just have a lesson where you're teaching grammar. Students aren't going to remember, and they're not going to be able to connect it. English is a language. It's meant to be used in real situations. So you have to put it in context. Mm-hmm. It's the only way to learn.
Mm-hmm. I think another challenge of teaching grammar is it's just so boring. That sometimes it's just, even if you're trying so hard, right? And students might still feel like, I'm going to fall asleep. I still don't understand.
Well, that's it. But just simply, if you're teaching like past tense, you put past tense sentences on the board, you analyze the sentences, you get them to practice, and then you go home. That is so boring. But if you say, look, we're going to talk about movies, and we're going to do a movie review. Well, now you're practicing your speaking, and you're talking about movies, which is something the students like. But because they're talking about movies they saw, they have to use the past tense. Mm-hmm. So you can help them with their past tense, and you can kind of correct them as you're going along. But it's not a boring grammar lesson. It's grammar within a larger context.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So it comes to our last question. It's like we kind of talked about this. So what message or advice would you like to give to aspiring ESL or EFL teachers are considering a career?
Well, it's an amazing career. You should do it. But my advice would be the two things. What I said: don't expect more from your students than you're willing to put in. And the minimum requirements to be a teacher in Canada are the minimum requirements. You should never aim for the minimum. You should aim to be the best that you can be. If you are, and you'll know this, if you are struggling to get to those minimum requirements and then you don't get the job, you know why, right? So you want to be as good as possible. Get involved, join teacher organizations, be part of the community. Once you're on the inside, you'll get those jobs.
It's just, well, I've been there, as a non-native speaker. I just feel like sometimes if you have a goal, you want to fight for it, there's a hope, right? So you, like what you said, is highly motivated. You want to get there. But sometimes it's just, it takes so long to get there, and then you've lost your motivation, your hope, and then you start to maybe I'm doing things for nothing and I just can't get what I want.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a weird process, because especially here in Ontario, the really good jobs are all publicly funded, school boards, colleges, universities, and nobody walks into a full-time permanent job their first year there. So it's really like a 2-year job interview. You start on a supply list, then you might fill in on maternity leave or a leave of absence. And then in the second or third year, you become a permanent teacher. It might take a long time. But if that's what you want, the financial rewards are there, the pension, the benefits, they're all pretty good. But it takes time. But again, those jobs are going to the teachers who are confident and have the skills. Mm-hmm. So if you feel less confident than you should, that's on you. You get better.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I personally have one last question. So it's about accent. I'm obsessed with accent. It's not like I had a moment I really want to drop my Chinese accent, and I worked really hard, and now I get to the point I feel like maybe not that important. Yeah. But anyway, so that is not from that perspective. I've had some audience there, and they said, I don't understand different accents. So either as a teacher or as an employee at some international companies. So when it comes to clients or students, it's, I really don't understand their accents. Is there any, a way to improve it, or get better with that?
Practice. I'm around international people all day, right? From accents, from typically, I think my classes this year had anywhere from 5 to 9 different first languages, and Spanish, Arabic, Mandarin, Korean, Japanese, Portuguese, a lot of different things. So right now, my understanding of accents is amazing. Well, it should be. But like living in Canada, you go out and you go to the store and that person might have a Spanish accent, and you go to somewhere else and they have a different accent. For Chinese students in particular, if you go to the university here, there's a pretty big number of Chinese international students at Western. You'll see groups of students together, and there's groups of Canadian students and Korean students and Colombian students all mixing together. And you see a group of Indian students with a group of Canadians, but then you'll see a group of Chinese students, and they stick together, and they're not really taking advantage of the opportunity of learning those different cultures and being exposed to those different accents. We've talked about this in class before, because we have so many international students from China in London, basically in every Canadian city now. You almost don't have to speak English. You can go to class with your friends and speak Mandarin and then listen to the professor. And then when you leave the university, you go to the grocery store. Well, we have a couple of Chinese grocery stores here, and they speak Mandarin. And you go get your hair done at the Chinese salon, and they speak Mandarin there. And then you order food later that night from the delivery service, and it's a Chinese delivery service, so you speak Mandarin there. And then you come to school the next day and say, Brian, I don't know why my English isn't getting better. I'm like, well, I know why. So I'm not, I'm never telling people, don't be friends with your friends, but you need to expand your horizon and just kind of be around and learn from people and be open. That is more difficult for some, easier for others. But if you're not exposed to the languages, then accents will always be an issue. But you see that here, where our international university pathway students, they listen to me, they listen to other teachers at the school, and then they finish their ESL and they go off to university. And then the first week they come back and they go, teacher, I don't understand my professor. He's from India and I don't understand his accent. Well, that's the reality of living in a place like Canada, is you never know. You need to have good general English, but you're going to run into accents. So
that reminded me of one of my professors at university. She's from Uganda. She has a very strong accent, and she was teaching one of the most important and difficult courses, research methods. We really had struggles there, and it was really difficult for me to understand her. Yeah. But it was so important because I had to use that to do my research. Yeah. Yeah, and then that's when I realized that, well, maybe students should be exposed to different accents.
Yeah, and exactly what you said. Like when I taught in Korea, it was, if you are a white person who is a native speaker, you have blue or green eyes, and you're tall or whatever, you'll get a job immediately. It doesn't matter if you're a good teacher or not. If you understand grammar or not, you'll get a job based on the way you look. Academics and jobs really in Canada now are the exact opposite. If you have the knowledge and you have the skills, they will pick you. They will overlook. They don't care where you're from. They don't care what you look like. They don't care what your accent is. They don't care about any of that. They care, do you have the knowledge? Do you have the skills? Do you have the education? That's what they're looking for. So it does lead to more and more situations where, you have people who are teaching at the university, or, people who are working at the bank or whatever. And people are like, wow, they've got a really thick accent. I don't understand them. They're very good, but accent was further down on the priority list, right? Where they're from was not on the priorities. So it's a change for sure.
Yeah. So again, sorry, and I have one more question. I just can't let go of him. Let's get rid of accent part. And I sometimes receive some comments about my expressions and vocabulary, and they always say "Oh, your words are simple. You don't use idioms." So for me, how do I put this? It's like if you don't use high-end vocabulary or advanced vocabulary, then your English is not good. Yeah, I also have this question actually, do I need to improve my vocabulary?
Yeah, I said I've been an ESL teacher for almost 20 years. I was treasurer of TESOL Canada. I'm the president of TESOL London. I'm looking up at the wall at our master's degrees here, and highly educated people. And my English is simple because I'm around ESL learners all the time. I can't use idioms. I can't use unique vocabulary because they wouldn't understand. So most of my day, I'm speaking simplified English. And so I talk to people who teach at the university or work as a doctor somewhere. And yeah, their language sounds very academic, very high skilled, but that it reflects their job. My English, I think your English reflects your job.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
If we could use, we're looking at our library here with a couple hundred ESL books and things behind us. Sure, we could use all the technical terms and things, but the students wouldn't understand it. So it kind of defeats the purpose anyways. Why use a fancy word when a simple word will do?
That's why sometimes I feel like, I want to work on something else other than teaching ESL just because I want to improve my own English, so I don't sound like always like a ESL teacher.
Yeah.
I do have a question. Let me just think about what I wanted to say. Is I totally forgot about that. I have baby brain. Oh, okay. So I remembered. So you said that when you talked to me. So let me ask this question. I think I talked about how we met each other, how we got together on live streaming, and so let me ask you about language question. When you first met me, you talked to me. Did you have to simplify your language? And then did you see any change after, gradually afterwards?
Not that I remember.
We've been together so long.
Yeah. We said it'll be 10 years, right? So no, because again, my former school, my former job was a private school. And the highest levels at that private school are academic, like university preparation levels, right? Those are high level. So I tend to talk to students at that level like I would talk to university students, right? Like with just regular English. I'm not trying to slow it down. I'm not trying to make it easier because the professors at university wouldn't. I talk to them the way I talk to my friends. At my new job at the public school, they kind of ended a CLB 7, the Canadian Language Benchmark 7, which isn't as high as those university students. So even at the maximum level at the public school board, I have to simplify a little bit just because they're not quite as high. But not I don't think I simplified too much.
Because I noticed the difference. I noticed the change. I've been around many people, either professionally or just friends, right? And I noticed how they talked to me. And even with the comments, some people in the very beginning, some people would just comment on my English, say, "Oh, your English is really good. Your pronunciation, your accent is really good." Now I don't hear that, so I consider not hearing such compliments as a compliment.
I don't know if it's that. I think you should think it is, but because I think when you came to Canada, there weren't many Chinese students yet, right? You were kind of before the big boom of Chinese students,
right.
But the students that we had from China were maybe lower level. So then when you came, I think people were pleasantly surprised at your English level, and it was easy to see the contrast. But now you work at the school board, and like I said, there's 50% of the teachers are non-native speakers, but they all have IELTS 8, IELTS 8.5s. I mean, they're high level English speakers. So yeah, you have that 8.5 IELTS. Your English is up there, but you don't stand out anymore, right? You're one of the crowd. Right. So that might be unusual for some people listening, is that, if you're in China and you have an IELTS 7, I mean, your English is very good. You could go off to do a master's at most universities. I mean, but to be an English teacher, an IELTS 7 or a 7.5, it's good. It's not great. It's good.
I remember your program at Trinity University. I remember the IELTS was because
they,
I thought about
required,
doing that.
Yeah,
right.
They required an 8. But a lot of times at schools, if you see a school in North America or Australia or somewhere and they say, we want an IELTS 8, what they're really saying is we don't want international students, right? They can't come out and say that. They don't want to discriminate, but they just make the requirements so high but it is a master's degree in teaching English. So having a high requirement, I mean, makes sense, right? It makes sense. But in general, 7 is what most programs will require because TESOL Canada and TESOL Ontario require a 7. So I think for you, that's it. It's not that you're getting fewer compliments now because your English is so much better. I think it's the people surrounding you used to be terrible and now they're as good as you. So you just don't stand out as much as before. That's yeah.
Yeah. Well, and then the one last thing for Brent and me is I find my English is the worst when I'm around you because
we know each other too well. And she'll say, you know that thing? And I go, yeah, I know what you mean. And I just go and do it.
and I remember on Friday, my mom and I went to Springbank Park. And then I asked Brian to come to pick me up. But I couldn't describe the thing there. So I said, the horse riding spinning thing.
But I know what she's talking about.
Yeah. So he was like, yeah, right, okay.
Yeah, okay, I know. Yeah.
So sometimes you really don't have to know the exact name of the thing. You can just describe it and people still understand you.
Yeah, but I mean, that comes down to language for my students too. That comes down to accuracy versus fluency. A lot of students, but especially Asian students, China, Japan, Korea, they want to be accurate. And so I see a lot of my Chinese students are quiet. Because if they're not 100% sure that they know the answer, they're not going to say anything. But we have a lot of Colombians in our school, a lot of Brazilians, and they are 100% about fluency. And they will say things like the horse spinny thing. And then I'll say, oh, the merry-go-round. They go, yeah, whatever, as long as you know what it is. They don't care. They made mistakes, but I understood it, and they don't care. So you might be a little unique in that you're from China, but you're focused more on fluency.
Yeah. But a lot of Asian students focus on accuracy.
Yeah, 100% on accuracy. Yeah. Like we have Japanese students that barely say anything because they want to be 100% sure twice over that before they talk.
Yeah. I remember one guy. I don't know if you know who I was talking about in my class.
Yeah.
He barely spoke anything in class until I made a mistake, and he would be like, "Yeah, that's wrong."
Yeah.
That's
But you see that, and the thing is, you just got to talk. You just got to start using it, and then it'll get better. Most Chinese students have excellent grammar knowledge and all, but it's just using the language.
Okay, I think Bob is coming here to say like you guys need to stop. It's been very great to talk to Mr. Talkie and Mrs. Talkie. I hope you like this episode, but of course, if you have any ideas and if you have any topics you want us to talk about, I'm trying to convince him to get on the podcast more often with me. So I'm not doing a solo, but if you have anything you want to share with me, please leave a comment. I hope you like this episode. So I think that's the end of the podcast. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Yeah, we're waving hands toward to the microphone. Anyway, bye.